Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Mark Josefsberg, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in New York City. He's been a teacher for close to 10 years now, and we're going to talk today about the use of Skype as a way of a distance learning process that some Alexander Technique teachers are using, Mark being among them. And I should say that we're having this conversation in the summer of 2012. Very early days, I think, for using Skype, but there are a number of teachers who are using it, and I thought it would be useful to talk to a few of those who are. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Mark, how maybe you could just say a little bit about how you use Skype. Who are your clients, and how did they come to you?
Yeah, I actually don't use Skype that much. Right now, I do have a couple of people who I'm teaching through Skype. It certainly doesn't make up the bulk of my teaching
Hmm.
for the obvious reasons. And I think I'll be the first one to say this, Robert, that this doesn't replace hands-on lessons.
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
So, there's no, to me, choice between Skype versus hands-on lessons.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, so I just thought that there's a lot of people in the world who who are interested in the Alexander technique and live nowhere near a teacher, where a teacher is out of the question.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I'll say that that's my situation as well. Where I live, there's vast swaths of territory around me where there are no teachers.
Mm,
Well, of course, with Skype, it doesn't really matter anymore, but there are teachers who I might see once or twice, but mostly the only way I'm going to be able to work with them is using Skype.
right, right. And in New York City, there's lots of Alexander teachers. It's kind of like Starbucks. No,
Exactly, yeah.
so
One on every corner, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. You trip over them.
Right. So, so as you say, it's certainly not the same as traditional Alexander teaching, which involves teachers using our hands to help convey the messages we're giving and to provide guidance. But your experience so far with Skype, what would you say you are able to accomplish with that
Well,
medium?
yeah, I think we're able to accomplish quite a lot, especially if you compare Skype to just reading blogs. If somebody just wants to read blogs or even reading books,
Hmm.
I think it compares favorably to just watching videos about the Alexander technique.
Hmm.
Or
Absolutely, I would
yeah,
agree. Yeah.
and even attending a class, let's say of 50 or 60 people, let's say a 45-minute class where the teacher isn't going to give any hands-on.
Hmm.
I think Skype can compare to that. Um, I, I mean, I've done whispered ah. I've taught whispered ah over Skype. You can see the person.
Hmm.
You can demonstrate.
Hmm.
You and with whispered ah, for instance, in breathing, you could hear the person.
Right. Yep.
And I've taught hands on the back of the chair and monkey and lunge.
Hmm. Hmm.
We've talked about initiating movement, hands, walking.
Right. So you do have the ability, of course, to see and hear the person you're working with. And of course, they can see you, which is
That's
pretty important because you could demonstrate, you could perhaps even demonstrate misuse or good use, right?
I'm great at demonstrating
Aren't
misuse.
we all?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
But
yeah, go ahead.
no, no, absolutely. You could demonstrate, you could see them, they could see you. I've also taught a violinist, a young violinist.
Hmm.
I mean, I didn't teach the violin. I don't play that instrument,
Hmm.
but certainly, and initiating movement, hand movement.
Right. Hmm.
Watched putting his hands on the violin, watching, picking up the bow, talking about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just maybe a word or two about the technology you're using. Are you using the built-in camera on your computer, or are you using, or are you or your students using something a little more elaborate?
I don't know what my students are using, but no, it's not very, my setup is not very elaborate. I'm just using the built-in camera that's
Mm-hmm.
on the iMac that I have.
Right, but can you, for example, can your students set things up so you could see them perhaps walking across a room or something like that? Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility, and we
Right.
do that all the
Mhm.
time.
Okay, so
Yes,
you can, and you don't have any special audio equipment. They're just talking, and you're hearing them the way you would anybody.
exactly. I don't use a headset or anything. Yeah, there's a built-in mic and a built-in camera.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just for Alexander teachers who are thinking of exploring this. Skype, of course, is free, a free download, and Skype to Skype calls are free. And what I've noticed with video is that it is a lot more important than with just audio that both parties have a pretty good internet connection.
That's very true.
Very, very important, actually. But beyond that, the technology can be extraordinarily simple.
It's very simple. Once I set up Skype, which takes, a couple of seconds, yeah, it's all set up. It's all ready to go.
Hmm. Hmm. And so, from your perspective, from the work you've done so far with Skype, um, is it your sense that the main limitation is that you cannot actually put your hands on the student and get kinesthetic feedback and provide that very direct form of guidance?
I think that might be the only limitation I could think of, but that's a huge limitation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll say for the second time, at least, that it's not as good as hands-on lessons, but it is limited in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I know, oh, in training, as part of our training at ACAT, where I went to school in New York, we would teach a student using only our hands and not speak, just as an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would also only speak and not use our hands.
Right. Uh-huh.
And so this Skype is only speaking and not using your hands.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as you say that. It occurs to me that Skype, of course, as we all know, there are a number of different strands of Alexander teaching, and I trained in the Carrington strand, which is a pretty standard one, but I also trained a lot with Marjorie Barstow. And Marjorie, although her hands were spectacular, she tended to work a lot more directly with people's thinking.
Hmm.
And I kind of think that maybe people who trained in that tradition might have a slight advantage using Skype. It's just a thought, because we're kind of used to talking people through things more, maybe more limited use of our hands in some ways.
That's very
But
interesting.
that's just a thought that crossed my mind. I'd like in a minute to get to what would be the word, some disapprobation in the Alexander world about this. But before we do that, is there anything else you'd like to say about working with Skype? That maybe some tips for teachers who are thinking of jumping into the water? What would you say?
Well, just to be prepared, if you've never taught, only using demonstration and and your verbal skills alone, it could be slightly frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Table work is very difficult. No, I'm kidding.
Mm-hmm.
There's not going to be any table work, but
Well, but not table work, but you could observe someone putting themselves into the constructive rest position, and you might be able to give them some guidance on book height.
I absolutely do, and I talk them going down.
And yes, the
You know,
process of getting into the position. Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, and we talk about constructive rest. You know,
Hmm.
if you can connect with someone, whether it's on the phone or in person or Skype, if you could connect with them and if you can communicate, you could really accomplish a lot.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
also occurred to me that the main thing I think with Alexander teaching is the student. The emphasis is on the student. So whatever means you could use to help the student not pull her or his head back and down,
Hmm.
and to be as free as possible in the body, etc., and the mind and non-rigidity and all of that, whatever means you could use, uh, uh, the technique is so powerful it could even work this way.
Hmm. And I guess the a point that Sharon Jacobisi, who's a teacher in Los Angeles, I spoke to earlier on this topic, said that the reality is there are a lot of people out there who would like to benefit from Alexander's discoveries and who there's no way they're ever going to have access directly to an in-person Alexander teacher. It'll just
Abs-
never happen for them. And do we want to deprive them of what we can convey? I guess that's a kind of a very basic question.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I'll just add quickly, after 3 lessons with someone, I looked at this young man and I said, "You look very different this week." And he said, "I feel unbelievable. My neck pain
Mm-hmm.
is significantly better."
Mm-hmm.
It
Mm-hmm.
was kind of thrilling in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah, and
and especially
yeah,
through this medium. Yeah.
absolutely. And I've had that experience, and I
Mhm.
think most teachers who have worked with Skype have had that kind of
That's right.
experience.
That's right.
So maybe before we bring our conversation to a close, it might be useful to address um, the disapprobation factor. I know you mentioned that you'd gotten some nasty emails, and I think in general there has been some concern among some teachers that this is debasing the technique or whatever. How would you respond to that?
I think there's a lot of in the Alexander community, a lot of protecting our precious technique, and I love the technique as much as anybody else. But I want to help people,
Yeah, yeah.
and this is another way to help people, as Sharon said, that wouldn't have access to a teacher.
Right. And when you work with someone using Skype, do you make it clear to them that what they're getting from you is not, quote, standard, unquote, Alexander teaching?
Absolutely, it happens pretty close to the beginning. I ask where they are and where is their nearest teacher.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one point that occurred to me when I was talking to Sharon, and I'll repeat it here because I think it's kind of relevant. Alexander, the guy,
Hmm.
he did not have access to any kind of outside help, really. I mean, even the mirrors were his own idea. So he not only didn't have hands-on guidance, but he didn't have any guidance, really.
I thought about that today. I mean, I thought about the fact that he was the only Alexander teacher in the world for a while,
Hmm.
but he might be one of the few or only whatever Alexander teachers that was never an Alexander student. And in other
Right.
words, he was never an Alexander pupil. He never had a teacher.
He didn't have a teaching certificate.
No, no, he didn't.
So Mark, is there anything else you'd like to say before we bring this to a close?
I can't think of anything specific except, should I say for the fifth time, that it's not as good as hands-on teaching?
Yeah, it probably wouldn't hurt.
Okay,
We
but
wouldn't,
outside of
might cut back on your hate mail a little bit.
a little bit, but I
Yeah.
did enjoy one of them. Someone wrote that Alexander was turning over in his grave,
Yeah.
And I wrote back that I said, well, if he is, he's probably doing it in a beautiful spiral and he's not compressing.
He's got a free neck. He's
Free
got a
neck.
free neck. Well, hey, that's great, Mark. Thank you for this. My guest today has been Mark Josefsberg, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in New York. He's been teaching for close to 10 years now. If anything we've been talking about intrigues you, we're going to put. I've created a list of teachers who, at this point, do use Skype, and this interview will have a link to that page. And in fact, this and any other interviews I do will be posted on that page. So Mark's name, of course, is there, and you can contact him or any of the other teachers on that list. And we'll also put a link to a website that gives you more general information about the Alexander Technique and can help you locate a teacher near you if there is one. Mark, thanks so much.
Robert, thank you very much.